I'll expand each part into approximately 1,400 words using simple English with a natural human-centric tone that would work well for a YouTube narrative. I'll avoid the names you mentioned and ensure the content adheres to YouTube policies. Amara had joined the Army straight out of college, drawn by both family tradition and personal conviction. Her grandfather had served in Korea, her father in Vietnam. Now, 22 years later, her own career had taken her from field operations in the Middle East to strategy rooms in Washington. The recent promotion to colonel felt like validation of those years. The missed birthdays, the relocations, the late nights poring over reports while friends built more conventional lives. The lights of her neighborhood appeared ahead. Just 3 more turns and she'd be home. That's when blue and red flashes erupted in her rearview mirror, painting the interior of her car in alternating colors. Amara checked her speedometer, 42 in a 45 zone, before signaling and pulling to the curb. Military habits took over. Engine off, hands visible on the steering wheel. Wait for instructions. She watched in the side mirror as a figure emerged from the patrol car. Male officer, average build, walking with the slightly exaggerated swagger that often signaled a younger cop or one with something to prove. License and registration came the sharp command before the officer fully reached her window. No greeting, no explanation for the stop. "Good evening, officer," Amara replied evenly. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" The flashlight beam hit her face directly, making her squint against its harshness. Behind it, she could make out the outline of Officer James Brennan, according to the nameplate on his uniform. "You were speeding and swerved over the center line back there," he stated flatly. Amara knew she had done neither but kept her voice measured. "I don't believe I was speeding, sir. I've been watching my speedometer carefully. Step out of the vehicle, please." The request came abruptly, with no acknowledgement of her response. "May I ask why that's necessary for a routine traffic stop?" Amara's training in conflict de-escalation kicked in. Ask clarifying questions. Maintain calm. Avoid confrontational language. Officer Brennan's hand shifted to rest near his holster. "I'm not going to ask again. Exit the vehicle now." The street was nearly empty. A couple walking their dog had stopped to watch from across the road. In the house nearest to where she'd pulled over, a curtain twitched. Witnesses, Amara thought. "Good. I'll comply, officer." She spoke clearly, loud enough to be heard by anyone nearby. "I'm going to unfasten my seatbelt now and open the door slowly." Each movement deliberate, she stepped out onto the asphalt. The night had grown colder, or perhaps it was just the chill of anxiety creeping up her spine. Her uniform pants and crisp button-down shirt identified her as military, though her jacket with rank insignia remained, folded on the passenger seat. "Put your hands where I can see them." Officer Brennan's voice had an edge to it that hadn't been there before. Amara raised her hands to shoulder height. "My hands are visible, officer." "Could you please explain what's happening here?" Instead of answering, he moved closer. "Turn around and face your vehicle." The couple with the dog had stopped walking entirely now. The man had taken out his phone. Across the street, a porch light flicked on, and an elderly woman emerged, arms crossed over her bathrobe. "Officer Brennan," Amara tried again, using his name deliberately. "I'd like to understand what violation you believe has occurred." "I'm happy to. On your knees now." The command cut through the night air like a blade. Time seemed to slow. In that moment, Amara made rapid calculations, the kind she'd made in war zones and crisis situations. Comply and maintain dignity or resist and risk escalation? The growing number of witnesses provided some safety, but also raised the stakes of any confrontation. "I'm going to kneel down," she announced, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "I am complying under protest." The asphalt was rough against her knees, still warm from the day's heat. A car drove past slowly. The faces inside turned toward the scene unfolding by the roadside. More witnesses. Officer Brennan circled her like a predator, flashlight beam dancing across her face, her hands, the ground around her. "Do you have any weapons on you?" "No, sir. I am unarmed." The military crispness of her response seemed to give the officer momentary pause. In the growing crowd of onlookers, phones were raised, recording. Someone had opened a window and was calling out, asking if everything was okay. The presence of cameras offered a thin layer of protection, and Amara was acutely aware of how different this situation might be if she were alone on a deserted road. ID, Officer Brennan demanded, standing over her. My military identification is in my shirt pocket, Amara replied steadily. I'll need to lower one hand to retrieve it. May I do so? The hesitation in his response was brief but noticeable. Slowly, with careful movements, Amara reached toward her breast pocket. The material of her uniform shirt felt different somehow under her fingertips, as if she were suddenly hyper-aware of every sensation. The laminated edge of her ID card. The distant sound of more car doors opening as neighbors emerged to watch. The weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. She held up the military ID card, her thumb covering only the corner, leaving her photo, name, and rank clearly visible. I'm Colonel Amara Richardson, United States Army, currently assigned to the Pentagon as Deputy Director of Strategic Operations. Officer Brennan's flashlight beam shifted to illuminate the ID card. In its reflection, Amara could see his expression transform. Confusion, then recognition, then something that might have been alarm. His posture changed almost imperceptibly, the confident swagger replaced by uncertainty. The gathering crowd had grown to at least a dozen people. Someone had started a live stream. Another neighbor approached cautiously, identifying himself as a retired judge, asking in a measured voice if Colonel Richardson needed assistance. Stand down. Mike, Officer Brennan called to the other officer who had remained by the patrol car until now, who had started walking toward them. We've got a misunderstanding here. Amara remained kneeling, her dignity intact despite the position. Officer Brennan, I'd like to stand now. Am I free to do so? The neighborhood had fully awakened. Porch lights blazed on both sides of the street. Cars had stopped. What had begun as a simple drive home had transformed into street theater, with an audience that grew by the minute. Officer Brennan stepped back, suddenly all procedure and politeness. Yes, ma'am. You can stand. There appears to have been an error. As Amara rose to her feet, brushing asphalt from her uniform pants, she was already thinking beyond this moment, to the report she would file, to the changes that might be necessary, to the conversation that would need to happen, not just for herself but for everyone who didn't have the protection of rank and uniform. The night air carried whispers from the onlookers. Someone called out offering to share their video. The elderly woman in the bathrobe had approached and now stood nearby, a silent witness and ally. The couple with the dog had moved closer too, their pet sitting obediently as they continued recording. Am I free to go, Officer Brennan? Amara asked, her voice carrying clearly in the night air. The moment hung between them, laden with unspoken implications. Behind them, the dashcam on the patrol car captured everything. Above them, the stars continued their ancient journey across the sky, indifferent to the human drama unfolding below. I need to run your license, Officer Brennan replied, his earlier aggression now carefully tucked beneath a veneer of professionalism. But the damage was already done. The neighbors who had gathered, 12, maybe 15 people now, had witnessed a black woman in partial military uniform forced to kneel on the road without cause. Amara stood perfectly still, aware that even now, any sudden movement could be misinterpreted. She'd been in combat zones where the rules of engagement were clearer than this suburban street in Virginia. May I retrieve my driver's license from my vehicle? She asked, maintaining the same measured tone she'd used throughout the encounter, the same tone that had helped her navigate tense negotiations with tribal leaders in Afghanistan and military officials in Iraq. Officer Brennan nodded stiffly. As Amara turned toward her car, she noticed a second patrol vehicle pulling up. Reinforcements arriving for what should have been a routine traffic stop, if it should have been a stop at all. The retired judge who had approached earlier stepped forward again. I'm Thomas Wilson, former circuit court judge. I've been watching this entire interaction. Officer, would you care to explain why you felt it necessary to have this woman kneel on the pavement? Officer Brennan's reply was clipped. Police procedure, sir. Please step back. Police procedure, repeated Judge Wilson. For a traffic violation? That seems excessive. The crowd murmured in agreement. Someone called out asking for the officer's badge number. Another voice suggested calling the police department directly. Amara reached into her glove compartment for her wallet, retrieving her driver's license with the same deliberate movements she'd used throughout the encounter. Every action calculated to avoid misinterpretation. This hyper-awareness wasn't new to her. It was the same vigilance she'd made rather than diminished by them. As she handed her license to Officer Brennan, she noticed his partner approaching from the second patrol car. Female officer, older, with the bearing of someone with experience. Amara recognized the look of assessment in the woman's eyes as she took in the scene. The gathering crowd, the man still live streaming, her partner's rigid posture. "What's the situation here, Brennan?" the female officer asked quietly, but not quietly enough to prevent those nearest from hearing. "Routine traffic stop," Officer Brennan replied, though nothing about this stop had been routine. The female officer, her nameplate read Garcia, glanced at Amara's partially visible uniform, then at the military ID Amara still held alongside her driver's license. Understanding dawned in her expression. "Colonel," Officer Garcia acknowledged with a slight nod. "I apologize for the inconvenience." The word inconvenience hung in the air, woefully inadequate for what had transpired. Being forced to kneel on the street while neighbors watched wasn't an inconvenience. It was a humiliation that no amount of rank could fully insulate against. Officer Brennan had moved back to his patrol car, presumably to run Amara's license. The crowd remained, their presence both witness and protection. A young woman approached Amara cautiously. "I got everything on video," she said quietly, "from when he first made you get out of the car. If you need it." Amara nodded, grateful. "Thank you. I may indeed need that." Judge Wilson had engaged Officer Garcia in conversation, his voice low but intense. Phrases drifted across the space between them: clear violation of protocol and unnecessary escalation and pattern of behavior. The night that should have ended with Amara at home, book in hand, had transformed into something else entirely. A moment of personal indignity that was rapidly becoming a public incident. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. 3 missed calls from her sister. Someone in the crowd must have recognized her, shared the live stream. News traveled quickly in military families, even quicker in black military families where stories like this were exchanged as survival information. Officer Brennan returned, handing back her license without meeting her eyes. "You're free to go, Colonel Richardson. There will be no citation." The abrupt dismissal without apology or explanation sent a ripple of dissatisfaction through the watching neighbors. Someone booed. Another person called out, "That's it? No apology?" Amara hadn't moved, her training in conflict resolution telling her that this moment needed proper closure. Not just for herself, but for everyone watching. For the community that would have to continue living with these officers patrolling their streets. "Officer Brennan," she said, her voice clear in the night air, "I'd like to understand why I was pulled over, asked to exit my vehicle, and instructed to kneel on the road. None of those actions align with standard procedure for a simple traffic stop, if indeed there was cause for a stop at all." The crowd had gone silent, waiting. Even the crickets seemed to pause. Officer Brennan shifted his weight, glancing toward his partner as if seeking assistance. Officer Garcia remained expressionless, offering no lifeline. "I believed I observed erratic driving," he finally said, "and your behavior seemed suspicious." The word hung in the air, its implications unmistakable. "What specifically about my behavior seemed suspicious to you?" Amara pressed, aware that every word of this exchange was being recorded by multiple devices. No answer came. Instead, Officer Garcia stepped forward. "Colonel Richardson, we apologize for the misunderstanding. If you wish to file a formal complaint, you can contact the department or speak with a supervisor." It was deflection, professionally delivered, but deflection nonetheless. Amara recognized it from countless military briefings where uncomfortable truths were sidestepped with procedural language. Judge Wilson moved closer. "I'd be happy to accompany you to the station right now, Colonel, or to provide testimony later if needed." The elderly woman in the bathrobe who had been watching silently stepped forward as well. "I saw the whole thing too, from my window and then from my porch. Been living on this street 43 years. Never seen a traffic stop like that. Community forming in real time around her. Strangers becoming allies against an injustice witnessed firsthand." Amara made a decision. "I won't be filing a complaint tonight, but I will be requesting the dashcam footage, and I'd appreciate contact information from anyone who recorded this interaction." She turned back to the officers. And I would like both of your badge numbers, please. Officer Garcia provided hers immediately. Officer Brennan hesitated before reciting his. The crowd had begun to disperse, though many remained, exchanging contact information with each other and with Amara. The young woman who had first offered her video created a group chat for everyone who had footage, adding Amara to it. As Amara finally returned to her vehicle, Judge Wilson approached one last time. "This shouldn't have happened," he said quietly. "Not to anyone, but especially not to someone who serves our country as you do." Amara nodded, appreciating his support but also recognizing the unintentional hierarchy in his words, as if her uniform somehow made the indignity worse, when the real tragedy was that this happened routinely to those without her rank or resources. "It shouldn't happen to anyone," she agreed, emphasizing the last word. Inside her car, hands on the steering wheel, Amara didn't immediately start the engine. The adrenaline that had kept her composed was beginning to ebb, leaving behind a familiar hollowness. She'd felt it before in moments when the contradictions of her existence became too stark to ignore, serving a country that still saw her as suspicious based solely on her appearance. She watched in the rearview mirror as the patrol cars finally pulled away. The neighbors gradually returned to their homes. The normal rhythm of the neighborhood resumed, though changed somehow, as if the shared witnessing had created new connections, a heightened awareness. 3 more turns, and she'd be home. The same distance that had remained when the flashing lights first appeared behind her. But the journey had become something else entirely, a public testimony, an unavoidable reckoning, a moment that would ripple outward into consequences she couldn't yet fully imagine. ID Expanded Story Part 3 Type, Text Markdown, Title True Story. Part 3, The Revelation Expanded. As the last neighbor returned to their home, Amara finally started her car. The engine hummed to life, a normal sound in a night that had ceased to be normal over half an hour ago. Her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, not from fear but from the controlled anger she had held in check throughout the encounter. The drive home took less than 2 minutes. She pulled into her driveway, killed the engine, and sat in silence. The porch light she'd left on that morning cast a warm glow across the front of the modest colonial she'd purchased 3 years ago when the Pentagon posting became permanent. Home. Safety. Or, at least it should have been. Her phone buzzed. Again. Her sister calling for the 4th time. Amara answered, her voice steadier than she expected. "I'm okay, Layla," she said before her sister could speak. "I'm home now." "I saw the live stream," Layla replied, worry evident in her voice. "Half my contacts have sent it to me already. Are you really okay?" Amara paused, considering the question properly. Was she okay? Physically, yes. Emotionally? That was more complicated. "I'm processing," she finally said. "Do you want me to come over?" "I can be there in 20 minutes. The offer was tempting, but Amara needed space to think, to plan her next steps carefully. "Not tonight. But thank you. I'll call you tomorrow." After promising her sister again that she was truly all right, Amara ended the call and finally exited the car. The night air felt different now, charged with an awareness that hadn't been there during her drive home from work. Every shadow seemed more significant, each distant sound more noticeable. Inside, she moved through her evening routine mechanically, setting down her keys, hanging up her jacket, checking the locks twice. Normal actions that felt performative now, as if she were moving through someone else's life. Her phone buzzed with notifications from the group chat the neighbors had created. They were sharing videos, comparing angles, discussing what they'd witnessed. Several people had already edited their footage, highlighting key moments. Officer Brennan's hand near his weapon, Amara kneeling on the asphalt. The gathering crowd. One message caught her attention. "Channel 7 asking for footage. Anyone talking to press yet?" The incident was expanding beyond neighborhood boundaries, beyond her control. Soon it would be shaped by outside narratives, political agendas, the endless opinion cycle of cable news and social media. Amara sat at her kitchen table, military jacket still folded over her arm, and considered her options. She could try to contain this, ask the neighbors not to share footage, handle it through internal military and police channels. That was the path of least resistance, the one least likely to disrupt her carefully built career. Or she could let it unfold publicly, Add her voice to the thousands of similar stories. Use her rank and position to and training initiatives and community outreach programs. The kitchen clock ticked steadily as Amara weighed these choices. On the wall opposite hung her grandfather's portrait in uniform, Technical Sergeant William Richardson, who had served in a segregated unit before the military officially integrated. He had told her once, "Wearing the uniform doesn't make them see you differently. It just gives them one more reason to resent you when you demand to be treated as an equal." Her phone rang again, an unknown number this time. Amara let it go to voicemail. The message notification appeared seconds later. "Colonel Richardson, this is Captain Diaz from Internal Affairs at the County Police Department. We've become aware of an incident this evening involving one of our officers. I'd appreciate if you could contact me at your earliest convenience to discuss what occurred." They were moving quickly, trying to get ahead of the story. Someone in the department had recognized the potential public relations disaster. A decorated officer forced to kneel during a questionable traffic stop. The entire incident captured on multiple cameras. Another call came through, her commanding officer this time. "Sir," she answered, automatically straightening in her chair despite being alone in her kitchen. "Richardson," the familiar voice of General Hayes replied. "I've just received a rather concerning call from the police commissioner." "Something about an incident this evening?" News traveling up parallel chains of command. The military and police leadership scrambling to understand the situation, to contain potential damage. "Yes, sir. I was stopped while driving home and—" Amara paused, considering how to encapsulate what had happened. "The officer escalated the situation unnecessarily, sir. I was ordered out of my vehicle and made to kneel on the road before I identified myself as military personnel." A heavy silence followed her explanation. "Then, are you all right, Richardson?" "Yes, sir." "No physical harm. And this was captured on video, I understand." "Yes, sir." Multiple videos from neighbors who witnessed the incident, and presumably the patrol car dashcam as well. Another pause. "The commissioner is requesting that we handle this quietly. Internal investigation, appropriate disciplinary action if warranted." Of course he was. The path of least public resistance. The same approach that had failed to create meaningful change decade after decade. "With respect, sir," Amara replied carefully, "I haven't decided how I wish to proceed yet." "Richardson," General Hayes's voice softened slightly. "Amara, I understand this is personal for you, but consider the broader implications. The tensions right now between police departments and military leadership. The political climate, your career trajectory. The implied threat wasn't subtle. Make waves and watch your carefully constructed career hit unexpected obstacles. 22 years of service, of excellence, of proving herself repeatedly in a system designed around men with different backgrounds and connections than hers. I always consider the broader implications." "Sir," Amara replied, her tone professional but firm. "That's what makes me good at my job." After ending the call with a promise to keep General Hayes informed of her decisions, Amara finally hung up her jacket. The weight of the oak leaf insignia seemed heavier tonight. The responsibility it represented more complex. Her phone continued to buzz with notifications. The neighbors were still active in the group chat, sharing information about their rights as witnesses, discussing the relevant laws regarding police stops. Judge Wilson had provided legal context about what constituted reasonable cause for the actions Officer Brennan had taken. A text from an unknown number appeared. "Colonel Richardson, this is Christopher Washington from the Post. We've received footage of your encounter with police tonight. I'd like to get your statement before we run the story." The press already had it. Of course they did. In an age where videos could be shared globally in seconds, containment was an illusion maintained by those with vested interests in the status quo. Amara moved to her study, powered up her laptop, and began making notes. If this was going to become public, and it clearly was, then she needed to approach it with the same strategic thinking she applied to her military duties. Identify objectives, assess resources, anticipate obstacles, develop contingencies. She opened a new document and began typing. Primary objective: ensure this incident creates meaningful change in police procedures, not just symbolic apologies or temporary outrage. Secondary objective: Protect my ability to continue serving effectively in my current role. Available resources, military rank and credibility, multiple video sources, witness testimony, potential legal expertise from Judge Wilson, media interest tries for. Potential obstacles, pressure from both police and military chains of command to minimize incident, public relations spin to discredit or diminish experience, potential retaliation through unofficial channels. Contingencies. As she worked through her analysis, a notification appeared on her laptop, an email from her sister with links to social media posts already spreading. The videos were being shared widely, with captions emphasizing her rank. Black female colonel, forced to kneel during traffic stop, U.S. Army colonel, humiliated by local police, Pentagon officer kneels on road, while cop stands over her. The framing bothered Amara, not because it was inaccurate, but because it emphasized her rank as if that were what made the incident outrageous, as if the same treatment of a civilian, without her credentials, would somehow be more acceptable. She opened a new browser window and began drafting an email to Captain Diaz in Internal Affairs. Her response would acknowledge his message but set clear expectations. She would meet with them, but not alone, and she would require complete transparency about any investigation. As she typed, Amara was acutely aware that her actions over the next few days would be scrutinized from all sides. Military leadership concerned about relationships with local law enforcement. Police officials worried about public perception. Media looking for the most compelling angle. Activists seeking another example of systemic problems. Politicians calculating how to position themselves. And somewhere in that web of competing interests was a simple truth. A woman driving home had been humiliated for no legitimate reason, protected only by rank and witnesses from potential worse outcomes. Amara finished her email, read it twice for clarity and tone, then hit send. Then she started a second email, this one to a law school classmate who now specialized in civil rights cases, not committing to legal action but exploring options.
Keeping pathways open. The kitchen clock showed nearly midnight when she finally closed her laptop.
The tea she'd planned to enjoy hours ago remained unmade, the novel untouched on her nightstand. Instead, she'd spent the evening navigating the aftermath of an incident that lasted less than 15 minutes, but would echo much longer. As she finally prepared for bed, Amara's phone buzzed with a final notification for the night, a message from the young woman who had first offered her video footage. Just wanted to check that you're okay, Colonel. What happened tonight wasn't right. Let us know if there's anything else we can do to help. The simple human concern brought unexpected tears to Amara's eyes. She typed back a brief but sincere thank you before setting her phone aside. Tomorrow would bring decisions and consequences. Tonight she needed rest and clarity. As she turned out the light, Amara found herself thinking of her grandfather again, and wondering what advice he would give her now. The colonel who had been forced to kneel, only to rise with purpose and determination. As she dressed in her full uniform, complete with decorations and rank insignia, Amara caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her seemed unchanged on the surface, same carefully maintained haircut, same precisely positioned oak leaves on her shoulders, same composed expression. But something had shifted internally, a tectonic movement beneath the visible landscape. The drive to the Pentagon followed familiar roads, including the stretch where she'd been stopped the night before. In daylight, without the pulse of police lights or the gathering of neighbors, it looked entirely ordinary. A suburban street like countless others across America. At the Pentagon security checkpoint, Amara noticed the guards' expressions as they checked her ID. The slight widening of eyes, the flicker of recognition. They knew, of course they did. The video had been shared within military circles, passed from phone to phone with murmured conversations about, "Did you see what happened to Colonel Richardson?" General Hayes was waiting in his office along with two people Amara didn't immediately recognize. One wore the uniform of a public affairs officer. The other was in civilian clothes but carried himself with military bearing. Retired brass now working in some advisory capacity. Amara guessed. "Colonel Richardson." General Hayes greeted her formally. "Thank you for coming in promptly. This is Major Chen from Public Affairs and Mr. Thornton from the Secretary's office." The stakes had been raised. Involvement from the secretary's staff meant the incident had reached the highest levels of the Department of Defense. "Sir," Amara acknowledged with a crisp salute before taking the offered seat. "We've reviewed the available footage," General Hayes began without preamble. "Both the videos circulating online and the dashcam from the patrol car, which the Erasure from the police, unusual in circumstances like these, where departments typically cited ongoing investigations to delay releasing footage. The behavior of Officer Brennan was clearly inappropriate," General Hayes continued. "The police commissioner has personally assured me that disciplinary action will be taken." It was the expected response. Acknowledgement of wrongdoing, promises of consequences, the machinery of institutional damage control grinding into motion. "The secretary is concerned," Mr. Thornton spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who navigated political currents for a living. "This incident comes at a particularly sensitive time in police-military relations. Of course, the real concern wasn't what had happened to her, but how it might affect institutional relationships, budget negotiations, jurisdictional agreements. With all due respect," Amara replied carefully, "I believe the sensitivity extends beyond interagency relations. This incident reflects broader issues that affect service members and civilians alike." Major Chen leaned forward slightly. "That's precisely why we need to coordinate our response, Colonel. Your unique position as both a high-ranking officer and someone who experienced this firsthand makes your voice particularly powerful. The message we send matters. The unspoken request was clear. Work with us, let us shape the narrative, be a team player. Use your voice, but only in ways that serve institutional interests rather than challenge them." "What specifically are you suggesting?" Amara asked, though she already suspected the answer. "A joint press conference," Major Chen confirmed. "You, alongside police leadership, presenting a unified message about accountability and cooperation, emphasizing the steps being taken to address this isolated incident." Isolated incident. The phrase hung in the air, its inadequacy palpable. What had happened to her wasn't isolated. It was connected to thousands of similar encounters, most without the protection of rank or the validation of video evidence. "I've received requests from several news outlets for interviews," Amara noted, "as well as invitations to speak at community forums about the incident." General Hayes frowned slightly. "We would strongly recommend declining those requests until after the joint press conference. Mixed messages at this stage could be problematic." Translation: "Don't speak publicly until we've established the approved narrative." "I understand your concerns," Amara said carefully, "and I have no intention of doing anything that would reflect poorly on the Army or my command. But I also believe this moment carries obligations beyond institutional considerations." Mr. Thornton's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened. "What exactly are you suggesting, Colonel?" Amara chose her words with precision, the same care she used when drafting strategic assessments that would inform decisions affecting thousands of lives. "I'm suggesting that my response to this incident needs to serve multiple objectives simultaneously. Yes, maintaining productive relations between military and police departments is important, but so is addressing the underlying issues that made this incident possible in the first place." The room fell silent as the three men exchanged glances. "Perhaps," General Hayes finally said, "you could share your thoughts on what an appropriate response would look like." From your perspective, it was an opening, small, carefully bounded, but real. Amara took it. "I believe I should participate in the joint press conference, but with the understanding that I'll speak honestly about what occurred and what it represents, not just as an officer, but as someone who experienced what many Americans experience without the protection of rank." She continued before they could object. "I would also like to accept the invitation from the police chief to participate in reviewing and revising their training protocols. Not as a photo opportunity, but as a substantive contribution to improving practices." Major Chen looked uncomfortable. That level of involvement could be perceived as overstepping institutional boundaries. Or, Amara countered, it could be seen as agencies working together constructively toward meaningful improvements. Isn't that the narrative we want to promote? Using their own objectives to serve broader purposes, a strategy Amara had employed successfully throughout her career when navigating institutional resistance. The meeting continued for another hour, a careful negotiation of boundaries and messaging, When Amara finally left the Pentagon, she had maintained more autonomy than they'd initially intended to grant her, though still within parameters that served military interests. In the parking lot, her phone buzzed with a text from Layla. "You've seen the numbers, right? Over 2 million views already." Amara hadn't checked social media since waking. Opening her phone now, she found her inbox flooded with messages. Fellow officers expressing support, strangers sharing similar experiences, journalists still seeking comment. The videos had indeed gone viral, spreading across platforms with various hashtags and calls to action. She scrolled through some of the comments, noting the range of reactions. This is what happens when police don't recognize who they're dealing with. She's a colonel. If they do this to a military officer in uniform, imagine what happens to regular people. This wouldn't have happened to a white colonel. Police need better training to identify military personnel. That last one particularly bothered her, as if the solution was teaching police to recognize rank rather than to treat all citizens with basic dignity, the same hierarchical thinking that had been evident in her meeting at the Pentagon. As Amara drove home, she passed a small group of protesters near the police station, maybe 20 people with hastily made signs. "Justice for Colonel Richardson," read one. "Respect our troops," proclaimed another. The conflation of issues made her uncomfortable, even as she appreciated the support. At home, more messages awaited. One stood out, from Officer Garcia, the female officer who had arrived as backup the night before. "Colonel Richardson, I wanted to reach out personally to apologize for last night's incident. Officer Brennan has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. I've also filed my own report about what I witnessed. If you're willing, I'd like to speak with you directly about changes we need to make in our department." An unexpected ally from within the system. Amara saved the number, making a mental note to respond later when she'd had time to think through the implications. Her sister arrived without calling first, letting herself in with the spare key. Layla moved through the house with familiar efficiency, putting on coffee, pulling out ingredients for a proper meal. "You haven't eaten," she stated rather than asked. "And you've been in meetings all day. Sit, food first, then we talk." The simple care of family grounded Amara, pulling her back from the abstract policies and public relations strategies to the human core of what mattered. As they ate, Layla updated her on family reactions, their mother's worry, their father's quiet anger, cousins asking how they could help. "They've scheduled the press conference for tomorrow morning," Amara said between bites. "Joint appearance with the police commissioner and chief. They've agreed I can speak without a prepared statement, though they've requested I review talking points." Layla raised an eyebrow. "And will you stick to those talking points?" "I'll address their core concerns," Amara replied carefully, "and then I'll speak to the larger truth as I see it." Later that evening, after Layla had gone home, Amara sat at her desk reviewing emails. Among them was a message from a civil rights organization inviting her to speak at an upcoming conference. Another came from a senator's office requesting a private meeting. A third was from a publisher inquiring about a potential book. The incident was taking on a life beyond her, becoming a symbol in larger conversations about race, authority, and accountability. Amara felt the weight of those expectations, the pressure to represent something beyond her individual experience. She opened her laptop and began drafting what she would say at tomorrow's press conference. Not the talking points sent by Major Chen, but her own words. The words that would acknowledge institutional concerns while still speaking truth about systemic problems. As she wrote, Amara thought again of her grandfather's portrait hanging in the kitchen, and of the legacy of those who had worn the uniform before her, some recognized for their service, others forgotten or marginalized despite equal sacrifice. The uniform hadn't protected them from indignity, just as it hadn't ultimately protected her, but it did give her a platform now, a voice that might be heard where others had been silenced. The clock showed well past midnight when she finally finished writing and closed her laptop. Tomorrow would bring cameras, questions, and consequences. Tonight she had found clarity about what needed to be said, regardless of institutional pressures or career implications. The same clarity, Amara realized, that had guided her through 22 years of service in a system that wasn't built with someone like her in mind. The clarity that came from knowing that some principles mattered Amara sat at the central table in full dress uniform, flanked by Police Commissioner Davis and Chief Rivera. Behind them stood a carefully arranged group that included Officer Garcia, General Hayes, and Mr. Thornton from the Secretary's office, visual symbols of institutional unity despite the tensions that had played out in private meetings. Commissioner Davis spoke first. His statement predictably focused on process and reassurance. A thorough investigation is underway. Officer Brennan has been placed on administrative leave. We take these matters very seriously. This incident does not reflect our department's values or training. The familiar choreography of official responses, delivered with practiced gravity, Chief Rivera followed, adding concrete details about policy reviews and training initiatives already underway. We've invited Colonel Richardson to participate in our officer training program, sharing her expertise in conflict de-escalation and leadership under pressure. Finally, it was Amara's turn. The room quieted as she adjusted the microphone. All eyes and cameras focused on her face. She had discarded most of Major Chen's carefully crafted talking points, keeping only the acknowledgement of institutional cooperation. Thank you. Commissioner Davis and Chief Rivera, she began, her voice steady. I appreciate your willingness to address this incident directly and to commit to meaningful changes in response. Standard opening, maintaining the collegial tone they had requested. But then she shifted course. What happened 2 nights ago was not simply a misunderstanding or a procedural error. It was a manifestation of systemic problems that affect many Americans, particularly Black Americans, every day. The only difference in my case was the uniform I wore and the witnesses who recorded the incident. She could feel General Hayes shifting uncomfortably behind her, could sense Major Chen's tension. But she continued, I've served this country for 22 years in various capacities. I've led troops in combat zones, coordinated complex operations across multiple agencies, and currently help shape strategic policy. But none of that mattered during those minutes on the roadside. In that moment, I was simply perceived as a threat rather than as a citizen deserving of basic dignity and due process. A reporter called out, Do you believe race was a factor in how you were treated? Amara looked directly at the camera before answering. I believe multiple factors contributed to Officer Brennan's actions that night. But I also know that research consistently shows racial disparities in how traffic stops are conducted and escalated. My experience doesn't exist in isolation. It connects to a pattern that many Americans recognize from their own lives. Another question came. Are you satisfied with the department's response so far? I appreciate the prompt acknowledgement of inappropriate conduct, Amara replied carefully. But true satisfaction will come only with sustained, measurable improvements in police practices. That's why I've accepted the invitation to contribute to officer training, not as a one-time event, but as part of an ongoing commitment to meaningful change. The questions continued for nearly an hour. Throughout, Amara maintained her balance, acknowledging positive steps while refusing to pretend they were sufficient, respecting institutional boundaries while insisting on deeper accountability. When the press conference concluded, Commissioner Davis leaned over with a tight smile. That wasn't exactly what we discussed, Colonel. It was exactly what needed to be said, Commissioner, Amara replied evenly. And it creates space for the reforms your department actually needs, beyond the temporary public relations exercise. In the weeks that followed, Amara navigated the complexity of her suddenly public profile. She declined most interview requests but accepted strategic speaking engagements where she could shape the narrative beyond the individual incident. She worked with Officer Garcia to develop training modules focused on de-escalation and recognition of implicit bias, drawing on her military experience with cross-cultural operations. Officer Brennan's internal review resulted in a 30-day suspension without pay and mandatory retraining, consequence that many community members felt was insufficient. But Amara understood the limitations of focusing solely on individual punishment rather than systemic change. Suspending one officer doesn't solve the underlying problems, she explained to her sister during one of their now regular Sunday dinners. If the system remains unchanged, the same incidents will keep happening with different officers. Layla stirred her coffee thoughtfully. But isn't punishment necessary for accountability? Yes, Amara agreed, but not sufficient. True accountability includes structural changes that prevent recurrence. That's why I'm more focused on the policy revisions and training programs than on Officer Brennan's specific consequences. 3 months after the incident, Amara stood before a group of police cadets in the department's training facility. No cameras or journalists this time, just 24 young people preparing to serve their community, looking at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism to open admiration. Leadership, she told them, isn't about the rank on your shoulder or the authority of your position. It's about how you use the power entrusted to you, especially in moments of uncertainty or pressure. She shared stories from her military career, difficult decisions made under fire, cross-cultural negotiations in villages where American uniforms were viewed with suspicion, the delicate balance of authority and respect. The hardest person to lead is always yourself, she continued. Your own fears, assumptions, and instincts in tense situations. That's why we train repeatedly for crisis scenarios, not just to learn procedures but to recognize and manage our internal responses. A young cadet raised her hand. But how do we know when to follow protocol and when to rely on judgment, especially when things are happening quickly? It was the essential question, the one that went beyond checklists and policies to the heart of human decision-making under pressure. That's where values become vital, Amara answered. When you're clear about your fundamental purpose to protect and serve the entire community with equal regard for every person's dignity and rights, that clarity guides your judgment in ambiguous situations. After the formal training session, Officer Garcia pulled Amara aside. The department has approved the policy changes we proposed, she said quietly, including the revisions to traffic stop procedures and the community oversight provisions. Small victories accumulating toward larger change. Not as quickly as activists wanted, not as thoroughly as communities deserved, but movement nonetheless. 6 months after the incident, Amara received an unexpected email from Officer Brennan. He requested a meeting, not for publicity or as part of any official process, but as a personal conversation after completing his retraining and counseling program. Amara considered declining. She had no obligation to grant this meeting, no responsibility to facilitate his growth or healing. But after reflection, she agreed, suggesting a public location, a coffee shop near the community center where she now regularly participated in policy discussions. Officer Brennan arrived in civilian clothes, noticeably uncomfortable as he approached her table. He seemed younger somehow, stripped of the uniform and authority that had shaped their first encounter. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," he began stiffly. "I wanted to apologize directly, not through the department or the media." Amara nodded but remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "What I did that night was wrong," he said, his eyes meeting hers briefly before looking down again. "Not just procedurally wrong, but fundamentally wrong in how I approached the situation and how I treated you. The retraining helped me understand some things, but honestly, watching the video of myself, seeing what I actually did from the outside, that's what really hit me." It wasn't a perfect apology, still focused more on his experience than on the impact of his actions, but it contained something genuine, the beginning of self-awareness rather than just externally imposed correction. "What will you do differently going forward?" Amara asked, not accusingly, but as a sincere question about his learning. Officer Brennan seemed surprised by the question, perhaps expecting. "I'm being more conscious of my assumptions," he replied after a moment, "asking myself why I'm interpreting a situation as threatening, following protocol but also questioning whether the protocol itself makes sense in each situation." He paused. "And I've requested a transfer to community policing, walking beats rather than vehicle patrol. I want to actually know the people I'm supposed to be serving. It wasn't transformation, that would take years if it happened at all. But it was movement, a crack in the defensive wall that often prevented real change in individual officers." Their conversation lasted only 20 minutes. Amara had no interest in an extended relationship, no desire to become the personal mentor for Officer Brennan's growth. But the brief interaction confirmed something she had believed throughout her military career, that systemic problems required both institutional change and individual evolution. Working in tandem, 1 year after the incident, Amara stood at a podium in the community center addressing a town hall meeting. The room was filled with local residents, police officers, community organizers, and municipal officials, a cross-section of stakeholders in ongoing reform efforts. "We've made measurable progress," she acknowledged, pointing to statistics projected on the screen behind her. Traffic stops resulting in escalated force have decreased by 37%. Civilian complaints are down 22%. Community satisfaction with police interactions has improved by 15%. Nodding toward Chief Rivera and Officer Garcia in the front row, she continued, "These improvements reflect genuine commitment from department leadership and many individual officers. The revised training programs, community oversight board, and transparency measures have all contributed to positive change." Then came the necessary qualification. But this work is far from complete. Disparities still exist in how different communities experience policing. Trust continues to be fragile and easily damaged. Sustainable transformation requires ongoing commitment, not just response to individual incidents. From the back of the room, an older gentleman stood, the same Judge Wilson who had approached during the original incident. "Colonel Richardson, I appreciate the progress you've helped facilitate, but I'm concerned about what happens when media attention fades and public pressure diminishes. How do we ensure these changes become permanent rather than temporary accommodations?" It was the question Amara had been asking herself throughout the year. How to convert moment into movement, incident into institution, reaction into resilience. "Sustainability requires structural embodiment," she answered. "Policies codified in law rather than departmental preference. Funding tied to demonstrated outcomes. Training integrated into basic certification rather than added as supplemental programs. And most importantly, continued community involvement in oversight and accountability." She gestured to the diverse gathering before her. "This room, all of you still showing up a year later, still asking hard questions, still demanding better. This is what makes change last beyond news cycles and hashtags." After the town hall, as people mingled and continued conversations in smaller groups, Amara found herself speaking with a young black woman who introduced herself as a law student interning with the public defender's office. "Your case was discussed in my criminal procedure class," the student said, "but what impressed me most wasn't what happened that night. It was how you've used it to create systemic change rather than just personal vindication." Amara smiled, recognizing in this young woman the same strategic thinking and commitment to justice that had guided her own career choices decades earlier. "The incident wasn't about me," she replied simply. "It was about patterns that affect countless others without my privileges and platforms. True justice would mean those patterns changing for everyone, not just better treatment for those with rank or visibility." As she drove home that evening, Amara reflected on the year's journey, from individual humiliation on a suburban street to community transformation still unfolding. Not complete, not perfect, but moving steadily in the right direction. The streets she passed looked the same as they had that night. Streetlights still cast the same patterns of illumination and shadow. Neighbors still walked dogs along the same sidewalks, but something had shifted beneath the visible landscape. New connections formed, new awareness cultivated, new possibilities emerging. At a stoplight, Amara noticed a patrol car pulling up beside her. The officer glanced over, recognized her, and offered a respectful nod. Not deference to rank, but acknowledgement of shared community membership and mutual respect. She nodded back, a simple human connection across divisions that once seemed unbridgeable. The light turned green. Both vehicles moved forward, traveling the same road in the same direction, separate but parallel journeys continuing into the night. I've expanded each part of the story into engaging narratives of approximately 1,400 words each, using simple English with a natural tone. The story follows Colonel Amara Richardson's experience from the initial traffic stop through the aftermath and long-term impact. Each part builds on the previous one while maintaining interest. Through 1. Relatable human emotions and reactions. Realistic dialogue that moves the story forward. Thoughtful exploration of complex issues without becoming preachy. 4. Visual details that help readers picture the scenes. 5. A balance of tension and reflection. 6. Natural language that avoids unnecessarily complex vocabulary. The narrative respects YouTube policies by avoiding excessive descriptions of confrontation while still honestly addressing the serious issues at hand. The story maintains a human-centric approach by focusing on Colonel Richardson's personal experience, emotions, and relationships rather than abstract policy discussions. Would you